Hey everybody, James from Wargames Illustrated here, and I'm just up front to present a little bit of an intro to a really cool video we've got showcasing the armies of Mike Peters. Now Mike Peters is someone who I've been working with quite closely over the last year or so. He's the author of Ruckus, which is an awesome skirmish rule set that we've produced. You can get that online from Wargames Illustrated. And Mike is an amazing hobbyist. He's a very keen army collector, and he also has a large collection of figures for Billhooks, which is another book that we produce. Same period, just a slightly bigger scale. And yeah, Mike brought in a couple of figure cases worth of stuff, let Joe, our video guy, film them, and then told us all about the background to the figures, some of his painting techniques, and lots of other cool little details. So for the next 20-ish minutes, I'm gonna flip over and let Mike do the talking in his dulcet Bristolian tone. And it's a bit like Bob Ross Presents Miniatures, so enjoy the chilled out little showcase.
Okay, so these are skirmishers, and these particular skirmishers represent a band of mixed mercenaries. So there are liveries from Germany, Switzerland, Bohemia, Moravia demonstrated there, and the pavises that they carry are based on actual pavises that are displayed in a small town in modern day Germany. Today in the town hall there's a collection of 20 odd pavises, all intact from the 15th century, and I've based my pavises on those. Painted from the base up, so I painted the base colour first, and for each of them I then highlighted and glazed. I used a fairly small brush, a 1.5 brush with a fine tip. Yeah, pretty much copied them directly from the pictures from the museum site. Yeah, I don't think I used any particular special technique with those really.
So which was the most challenging of them, would you say, to paint?
Oh, I think probably the one showing the knight's helm on top of the shield coat of arms, because the first time I painted that, it's the one at the front there, quite red. Because when I first painted that, I wasn't sure that I was showing the image. I wasn't sure that the image was coming across of it being a knight's helmet with the plume on top of it and the sitting on top of the shield, but actually it looks quite good now. And the other one that was quite tricky was the image of the saint. It was on the red and white shield. Again, making it look, appear to be a human figure rather than just a blotch of different colours, because it was quite small.
It's also, it almost carries the style of the period illustrations as well, right? In that you've not tried to make it hyper realistic or anything.
Right, sure, absolutely. Yeah, I've just gone for an image really. Yeah, I think you're right. Hopefully it does look as though it comes from that era. And I was caught between whether to age and dirty them up a little bit or do them clean and pure. And I've kind of gone for a little bit of a mix really. Some of them are a bit tatty, deliberately tatty looking, and some of them a bit pristine. These are Perry miniatures. The standard bearer is a metal miniature, and the chap to the right of him, the man-at-arms, is a plastic figure from the man-at-arms box. And the standard is quite an interesting one. This is a shinbone saltire argent on a sable background, and this is the coat of arms of a man called Sir John de Barry, who is a local lord, and that's my interest really, and one of the reasons, the ethos behind building this army was to investigate and research local lords, people who lived in the area where I live. And John de Barry lived about 2 miles away from my house. He fought for both sides variously, Lancastrian and York. He held the commission of array, so he was raising armies for various, either kings, either Edward IV or Henry VI. He fought for both. And he was he was quite a character really. It's a little bit of a bandit knight really. So he would send his men out to raid the other lords and steal whatever he could, and then deny it furiously in court.
And that's why he's got Such a gruesome looking man.
Yeah, and being that it's crossed shin bones, and he's a Bristol pirate as far as I'm concerned, a Bristol land pirate, and it's irresistible to me.
All right, I'm just going to wake you up from the lullaby that Mike's been singing here and remind you that if you're enjoying this content, we have lots more stuff like it on our channel, so make sure you like this video, drop a comment so Mike knows you love him, and yeah, subscribe to see more of this.
Okay, so these are periplastic miniatures. These are the Wars of Roses infantry box with some additions. There's some Oathmark heads in there and some Fireforged bodies and a few little characters just to create some interest. And they're done in the Argent and Jewels livery of Sir William Berkeley of Berkeley, who was a bit of a dubious, duplicitous character. When I'm doing a body of troops like this, I don't like to have two the same. So the wonderful thing about the multi-part element of these plastic figures is that you can swap bows and bills and arms and heads. So that's why I incorporate parts from other manufacturers. There's Oathmark in there, as I say, and Fireforge. Trying to think of what else is in there. There's quite a few different groups just to make it more individual. And then I choose whichever livery they're going to be, and I like to mix that up as well. So some of them have a full coat of red and white livery. Some of them would just have a sleeve or a hat that's painted in that colour. Okay, so this figure is from Front Rank, who they sculpt a wonderful figure, really. And this represents His Grace Sir Henry Holland, the Duke of Exeter, a devout Lancastrian and present at many of the big battles. I can't find any evidence of a battle he was at where he was on the winning side, and he often ran away. He was a rather ignoble man, known to have a violent temper, and quite a cruel man, and quite cowardly too. So he's an interesting character to have in your battle. And the approach I took with him again was to freehand the standard. It was a bit of a challenge, but thoroughly enjoyable. And then I found a portrait of him from the 15th century, which showed him with his rather elaborate cloak, which is what I painted on him to make him a bit more distinctive as a leader of his men.
About what kind of time does a figure like this take you, and do you split it into multiple sessions?
This one took ages. To paint the cloak took 2 sessions of about 2.5 hours a time. I couldn't do it all in one session because my eyes were watering and falling out of my head, and I just had to take a break, really. So in total, probably about 10 to 12 hours to finish him.
That's not as bad as I feared.
Is that right?
No, I thought it might be longer, yeah. Because I find it harder to do really clean character models than it is to do those kind of more expressive kind of the zenithal style that I was saying.
Yeah, sure,
You can be a bit looser there, whereas yours, it's so refined.
Very precise, isn't it? Yeah. It varies, and I've never really timed it, so I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you. I always take longer, usually take longer on the faces. One lovely thing about these figures is so many of them have got armour on, and that's quick, isn't it? I know you love painting the armour, but it's quick compared to anything else. Mm-hmm. So men-at-arms take no time to paint, really.
Yeah, so
did them in a few hours.
We'll get onto we're onto some serious armour on the next one. So
yeah. So these are Perry's plastics. These are the Foot Knights set, or most of them are. The Standard Bearer itself is a Front Rank figure. The standard's made out of newspaper with PVA glue and some brass rod and some plastic rod, and it demonstrates the battle standard of Sir Henry Holland. He is often depicted as having an ear of wheat as his battle standard, but one of his other symbols was the fiery beacon, and I just think with his character, this violent, vitriolic, aggressive drunkard of a man, I'm sure that this was a more suitable standard for him. The men-at-arms, fairly quick and easy to paint, really, with just 3 different choices of metallic paints and lots of washing, and then afterwards some washes with blue and some washes with black, and some of them have joints picked out in gold just to make them all look a little bit different from each other, really.
What are your metallic paints of choice?
At the moment, I'm using Vallejo, so I've got the gunmetal and the mail, I think it's mail and chain, plate and chain, something like that, and shine and silver are the three that I'm using for that. But I also like the Citadel, their most silvery one, Runefang. I think it is Runefang steel, as a very fine highlight. And what I like to do as well is paint little chips out of their blades, and that's a technique that I've kind of copied from Kev Dallimore, with a little line of silver across the blade and a little line of black ink just to highlight it, and it gives the impression of being notched. So this is Sir William Berkeley of Berkeley, who was another bit of a duplicitous character really, and one of the things I found out about him was at Bosworth he provided troops for one side and paid for troops for the other, and didn't really fight himself on either occasion. There was an ongoing family dispute between him and the Talbot family over who owned which bit of land and who had rights to what castles, that went on for 50 or 60 years before the Wars of the Roses, and was concluded at the Battle of Nibley Green in 1470. So I find him an interesting character because he's local. He's painted as a little vignette really, with his musician and his standard bearer. They're all Perry figures. This is one of the first standards that I freehanded, and it was a real challenge. The white on there isn't actually white, it's a very, very, very pale grey, and layered with very fine black glazes really to make the shadowing effect. But I never, very, very rarely use pure white on anything. So this is the unit that represents Henry Holland's men, and their livery was white and red. And as we were discussing earlier, very rarely use white as such. So the lightest colour here is a very light beige and ivory, Vallejo ivory, and sometimes a little titch of white as an absolute highlight on the corner of a piece of cloth. And of course we think of whites as being cold whites, which would come up from a grey up to a higher, lighter colour, or maybe a warm white, which would start as a light brown or a beige, which is what I'm using here to represent cloth. So for cloth I very often use warm whites, starting with a light brown, going through beige right up to the ivory colour. And for artefacts like the flags, or for painted things, then I tend to use a grey white and start with a very light grey and work my way up, constantly mixing and blending more lighter colours into it until you get a very near white but never actually quite white. So the standard is of the one of Walter Devereux of Woburley, who was known as de Ferrers as his awarded title. And the standard is split with the Woburley arms on one side and the de Ferrer arms, the red one, on the other side. This guy is Sir Walter Devereux of Woburley. He was a proper scrapper in the War of the Roses. He fought in every major battle there was for the Yorkists, was always in the thick of the action. And never a bad word said about him. So I think he's probably your noble hero, really. This is what he would be. Very rare for my forces, very rare for me to have an interest in a goodie. And here's the man of the wars, really. This is Edward IV in his guise as Edward of March, wearing the sun in splendour on his surcoat, which is coloured with the colours known as blue, Murray and blue, Murray being a blood red colour. And this is a Perry figure that I extended the legs with brass rods and filled in with green stuff, and extended the torso with a rod and some green stuff to make him up to his height. He was 6'5" in real life, and I think he's a Terminator robot come back from the future. I think that Cyberdyne Productions thought that Margaret Anjou was probably an ancestor of Sarah Connor, so they sent this robot back to replace Edward IV to hunt her down. So these figures are so-called generic figures, really. They're all Perrys with a few bits of Fireforge in there and some Oathmark. And they're painted in muted colours really, because I believe that most of the colours of the cloth at this period would have been much more dull than the manuscripts would have us believe. Liveries, from what we understand, were fairly rare. They certainly existed for certain campaigns and certainly for lords with lots of money and for royal armies, but less so perhaps for a lot of the units that were involved, and that's what these guys represent. And in the second row there are 2 men-at-arms here, one in a red surcoat and one in a white surcoat, and I interchanged those into my men-at-arms unit to show when they're fighting for York or Lancaster. The slightly blue ones at the back are to represent Thomas Talbot's unit. So Edward IV wouldn't be anything without the fact that he told everybody who he was. So he was very big on having all his men in liveries, and his badges appeared everywhere. He had multiple badges. He had the White Rose of Rouen and the Sun in Splendour. He had a hawk in fetterlocks and various other devices that he wore. So here we have the Royal Heralds, wearing the royal tabards and carrying the trumpet with the royal flag on, the flag of the king, if you like. And we have Edward of March's trumpeter there with the Rose of Rouen and the Sun in Splendour together on the tabard hanging from that. And behind them we have a unit of bills which are painted in the blue and murrey of Edward IV, also Edward March, and a standard which I found a picture of this online, the Sun in Splendour. And I liked it so much I had to paint that. I was going to paint the Rose of Rouen on there, the white rose with the sun behind it, but I so liked that picture I had to paint it. It just felt like a nice challenge to paint it really. It's quite distinctive and it's a bit fantastic, isn't it? You kind of think, people really went to war in history behind standards like this, you know. Where do I sign up? Because you'd fight for that, wouldn't you? Kind of, hey, that looks like fun. But yeah, that's the story behind that, really. 16-pointed Sun of Splendour with a sort of demure look on his face.
Well, that was a very high standard, and if you're all about high standards, don't forget that we've got a lot more high standard videos on this Wargames Illustrated YouTube channel. So make sure you subscribe to it and give this video a like. Maybe put a comment about how good Mike is, because that'll make him very happy.
So these skirmishers are Burgundians. Edward used a lot of Burgundians, particularly in his 1471 campaign. And what they've got in front of them is the pavis, which is a large wooden shield which was fixed into the ground in front of them. And this was to give the crossbowmen time to load their guns, because these were quite powerful crossbows by this time, and they were wound up with a device called a cranaquin or a windlass. And that took some time to actually charge to arm the thing before he loaded it even. And in that time they were vulnerable, so you'd crouch down behind the pavis and that would give them some cover. And it gave them another chance to bear their lord's arms. And so these are the arms of Charles the Bold of Burgundy. And these would have really, they were probably mercenaries, but they might also have been deemed allies, because Edward, as king, allied himself strongly with Charles the Bold, so they may well have been allied troops rather than just mercenaries. The last of our lords, another local lord, is Thomas Talbot, the Viscount Lisle, with his rather interesting standard. I enjoyed painting this standard, but it was very hard to keep them equal, keep the different lions on there looking very same and symmetrical. And to my mind, it looks like they're at a bit of a rave. Looks like they're all having a really good freak out. And maybe they were medieval lions. Why not? You know, maybe they did rave on in their own way. Thomas Talbot was a bit of a tragic character. He was 19 or 20 years old when he was tricked into a battle by the Lord Berkeley, William Berkeley, we met earlier, a duplicitous and somewhat unhinged person, really, where Talbot met Berkeley in battle at Nibley Green, and all the sources seem to indicate that Talbot had a much smaller force of about 300 men. Most of them would have been locals armed with farm tools, and Berkeley had somehow conjured up an army of 1,000 men, a lot of them hardened troops and mercenaries and miners from Kingswood in Bristol, so that we're represented. And it was basically an assassination, because very early in the battle Talbot was hit in the mouth by an arrow and then cut to pieces by a group of men who just ran over and stabbed him into bits, really. And very few people died on the Berkeley side, but half the Thomas Talbot's force were destroyed, completely killed. Folly of youth. And there's an awful lot of interesting intrigue around the events that led up to that battle. So Talbot managed to actually capture Berkeley's castle for a short while, and actually kidnapped Berkeley himself for a short period of time. So he was obviously a tricksy little character. He was only 19 years old when he was killed, so 20 possibly. So there's quite an interesting little history there to investigate.
This video has been brought to you by WiPrime, Wargames Illustrated magazine's online members club. View more videos or find out more about WiPrime by following these links.